Hi there, Bristol teacher, taking you through another Carol Ann Duffy poem. This time we're looking at the poem Beautiful. This is essentially 4 different stories. The first one's about Helen of Troy, second one about Cleopatra, third one about Marilyn Monroe, and the fourth one, Princess Diana. Okay, so once again, we're looking at Beautiful, and this is the first part of the poem, and we're talking about Helen of Troy here. She was born from an egg, a daughter of the gods, divinely fair, a pearl, drop-dead gorgeous, beautiful, a peach, a child of grace, a stunner. This listing of Carol Ann Duffy's is referring to her origin, Helen of Troy's origin, which is rumoured, obviously Greek mythology, is that she was born from Zeus, who turned himself, or Zeus, who turned himself into a swan and had sex with Leda, and their offspring was Helen. So obviously a mythical background to this woman, but we base this on fact. Helen was we don't know if she was seduced or whether she was kidnapped, abducted by Paris, a Trojan prince, and taken from Menelaus, from the Greeks. Menelaus as her husband, stolen by Paris of Troy, and whisked away to Troy. And every Greek suitor, and there was many suitors because Helen's dad was afraid to turn away suitors, potential marriage material. So there was loads of them, hundreds of them, and they all launched their ships, and 1,000 ships. This is where we get the launcher of 1,000 ships, a face that launched 1,000 ships, were launched to bring her back from Troy. And this was what started the Trojan War, which was a 10-year war. The Greeks surrounded the walls of Troy until they gave back Helen. Okay, so let's look at these first stanza then. So we're talking about her origins, kind of mythical origins. This list of superlatives, you might say: a pearl, drop-dead gorgeous, beautiful, a peach, a child of grace, a stunner. So very much contemporary language. In her face, the star-like sorrows of immortal eyes. Notice the alliteration there, and who looked there loved. In other words, everyone that saw her fell in love with her. You might say, and it says underneath there in the second stanza, she won the heart of every man she saw. They stood in line, sighed, knelt, beseeched, be mine. So in italics, this sense of her being the princess of the common man. Everyone was connected with her in some ways. She married one, but every other mother's son swore to be true to her till death. So she, as it says here, enchanted a whole nation, you might say, similar to Princess Diana in our contemporary time, by the perfume of her breath, her skin's celebrity. So we're making connections there in these first 2 stanzas with the latter parts of this poem, talking about Princess Diana. So we've got this contemporary language and also this ability to capture the hearts of an entire nation. So when she took her lover, fled, was nowhere to be seen. Well, so Carol Ann Duffy's implying there that Paris didn't abduct her, but in fact seduced her, we maybe say, it might be. Her side of the bed unslept in cold, the small coin of her wedding ring left on the bedside table like a tip, the wardrobe empty of the drama of her clothes. It was war. And that's reference to the Trojan War, the 10-year war, that, it's the source of much literature, obviously the Iliad, Homer's Iliad, where, and Odysseus, the voyage of Odysseus, who goes to fight the Trojan War, and his journey back was the Odyssey. So 1,000 ships. Yes, Helen was the person who launched the face that launched 1,000 ships to try and bring her back. On every one, 1,000 men, each heaving an oar, each with her face before his stinging eyes, stinging with the salt water. Her name tattooed upon the muscle of his arm, a handkerchief she dropped once for his lucky charm. In each case, the his is yet another suitor, a person who has been caught by her in her charms, as it were, and feels the urge to somehow bring her back. Each seeing her as a local girl made good the girl next door. And in a way, this links us not only to Princess Diana, although she wasn't exactly the girl next door, but Marilyn Monroe, who certainly was. Okay, a princess with the common touch. There you go. So that is definitely a connection, you could say, to Princess Diana in some ways, because even though she may not have been, sort of working class, there was certainly a connection with the working people. Queen of his heart, pin-up superstar. Well, that links us with Marilyn Monroe. The heads of every coin he'd tossed, the smile on every note he'd bet at cards, bragged and shoved across 1,000 miles of sea. So this mention of his and he is this kind of nameless group of every man, really. Every man is somehow taken by the beauty of this woman. And then we move on. Meanwhile, lovely she lay high up in a foreign castle's walls, clasped into a hero's brawn, loved and loved and loved again. Notice, this continual listing, this excessive sort of repetition to make the point that she is loved, even though she's been abducted. Carol Ann Duffy seems to think that she's been rather the alternative interpretation, that she's been seduced, and that in Troy, in this castle, she's with Paris, very much in love. And this entire battle that's surrounding her, this entire fleet that are coming to save her, perhaps she'd rather that didn't happen, and that the men here have got the wrong idea. They're all rushing to fight a war for someone who's perfectly happily hidden away. So we move on, drifting down to the boys at the gates who march now to the syllables of her name. So we move on, talking about her beauty is fame. And then there's kind of rumours. Some said is repeated, this phrase, some said she turned into a cloud. Some swore they saw her smuggled on a boat dressed as a boy. Well, we have that later on with Cleopatra as well, who dresses as a boy. So there's a sense of androgyny that crops up here. And, some vowed that they were in the crowd. This kind of sense of mythical rumour. Helen of Troy is based, you might say, on demigods and Greek mythology, what with Zeus and Leda being her parents. So it's not surprising that we have this some said, some vowed that they were there with her at the time. Okay, a maid who loved her most. Notice that the maid says no word about her ending, as it were. And this is a reference to a plot at the end of her life that in order to get back for the deeds during the Trojan War, many people died, and it was kind of like an avenge for that, or revenge, sorry. And the woman that took her in on the island in her last days had her put to death. They hung her. So this is this reference to how she swung from a rope at the end, and that this woman at the end, her maid, lived alone and kept a little bird inside a cage. So we presume that's a metaphorical bird inside a cage, a sense of freedom perhaps. And then we move on to the second stage. The second stage being Cleopatra, and that she never aged, she sasaged up the river in a golden barge. So this incredibly powerful, beautiful queen of Egypt, once again there's this list of opulence, this golden barge, the alliterative girls giggling at her jokes, the mythological arrival from a rug at Caesar's feet. Apparently she's rolled up in a rug and then carried in, and then the rug was unrolled. But she's famous really for having an affair with Caesar's best friend, his aide Antony. and hence obviously the Shakespeare play Antony and Cleopatra. And Antony takes her side because it's Caesar that's pitted against Cleopatra eventually, and the armies are pitted against each other, but it's Antony that famously takes her side. He's completely won over by her sexuality and power of beauty. And it says here, she puts up a crimson tent, and we have this list of opulence: the silver plate with grapes, honey, yogurt, roasted songbirds, gleaming figs, soft wine, soaked herself in jasmine-scented milk. She knew her man. In other words, once again, man is this almost two-dimensional character that is, she is able to get any man. She knows what's required. And she knew that when he stood that night, 10 times her strength, inside the fragrant boudoir of her tent, and saw her wrapped in satins like a gift, his time would slow to nothing, zilch. Once again, notice how that contemporary language creeps in, and it helps in our comparison of these four women, because when it suddenly brings it up to date. But it's saying that the man was nothing once he was presented with the beauty and the power of Cleopatra's beauty. His physical strength meant for nothing. It talks about how she had Caesar's head between her teeth. And that could be a phallic reference. This power of sexual beauty. He crouched with lust on her couch. She lay above him, painted him, her lipstick smeared on his mouth. Absolute power of sexuality. Her powder blushing on his stubble. Very detailed reference to what's going on between her and Antony. She drunk him under the table. She matched him glass for glass. So in other words, she was able to compete with him, gambling, which is mentioned at the roll of a dice, but also drinking games, sucking lemons, licked at salt, all the things that are done in heavy drinking sessions, somewhat. Swallowed something from a bottle where a dead rat floated. Well, not quite a tequila worm, probably much worse. But we get this idea that she is able to compete with men at their own game. And also, later on, we have this point when, just like Helen of Troy, pulled on boys' clothes, this androgyny, this cross-dressing, crept at dusk into his camp, his shadowed tent touched him, made him fuck her as a lad. Curious that she has this unbelievable power over him, even able to dupe him into thinking that she was a boy. But once that was achieved, still he lusted after her. So it's almost like she knows all his secrets, and yet still, as a result, has a kind of power over him, I suppose. Armies changing sides. And this is the power she had over Antony, to change an entire army. This last two lines, this lost forever in the sea of snakes, is a reference to the Shakespeare Antony and Cleopatra, which is armies changing sides of cities lost forever in the sea of snakes. And it refers to Antony being dismayed to see the Egyptian fleet surrendering off the coast of Alexandria. Cleopatra flees and has it rumoured that she's dead, and Antony thinks this rumour is true, kills himself, and in order to avoid capture herself, Cleopatra, by the Romans, she clasps this asp or a snake to her breast and another to her arm, and in order to commit suicide, as it were. The third section of the poem deals with Marilyn Monroe from the 1950s and 1960s. If you don't know who Marilyn Monroe was, do look her up. A blonde beauty, blonde bombshell, featured in many movies, and obviously the subject of Andy Warhol's painting as well, which showed her in different forms, meaning that she, was a manufactured image, as it were. The camera loved her, close-up, backlit, adored the waxy pouting of her mouth. Notice the reference to film, to photography, because of course this manipulation of the image by photographers is what you might say achieved her fame. Her sleepy, startled gaze, the alliterative sleepy, startled. She breathed the script out in her little voice. So once again, we have a powerfully sexual being, beautiful and powerful. But as opposed to Helen and Cleopatra being able to command vast armies, you might say that Marilyn Monroe commanded armies of photographers, I suppose, certainly commanded the media, but ultimately the media killed her, I suppose, similar to how the Romans and maybe the Greeks eventually killed Helen. They filmed her famous, filmed her beautiful, guys fell in love, dames copied her. So we've got a similar world to what was described with Helen, in that, people en masse, men en masse falling in love with her. An athlete licked the raindrops from her fingertips to quench his thirst. She married him, the US whooped. Well, that's a reference to Joe DiMaggio, the baseball player, a famous baseball player, a famous athlete, a celebrity, who was able to obviously meet her and impress her. She married him. This reference to him, we don't name the person. It's as if he is two-dimensional. He's not important. He's just a man, one of many men, whereas Marilyn Monroe is one woman on her own that the world is looking up to. Okay, so we move on to, they filmed her harder, till her hair was platinum. This sense of, you could say it's a sexual reference, this harder, but this hair being platinum, metallic as it were, her teeth gems, her eyes sapphires pressed by a banker's thumb. So it's as if she is being created by the media. All these things are false. Teeth are not gems, but here they are. And of course a banker's thumb, being like she is very bankable. She sang to camera one, gushed at the greased up lens, her skin investors gold. Yeah, if you put grease on the lens, it softens the image, which makes you look more romantic, you might say. It was certainly done in the 40s and 50s. And she famously sung to the president, sung Happy Birthday to the president in 1962. It was in fact rumoured she had an affair with President Kennedy, but just a rumour. The president was dead the very next year. Beautiful, but ultimately false. A voice likened to champagne. A poet came, found her wondrous to behold. She married him. The whole world swooned. So we got the whole world whooped, the whole world swooned. This repetition of the last line. And she married him again. No mention of who it is. Well, it was Arthur Miller, the famous playwright, who also married her. So we have this, once again, a kind of list, one of many men that doesn't really matter, because what matters is this iconic beauty on her own. We mentioned dumb beauty, as if it's a dumb blonde, a famous reference to dumb blonde. But kind of mocking, really. She slept in an eye mask, naked, drugged, till the maid came, sponged at her puffy face. Once again, we got this kind of reference to the maid, Cleopatra maid and Helen's maids, and it's the maid that's there at the end. Painted the beauty on in beige, pinks, blues, then it was coffee, pills, booze. This very clear rhyme from beautiful pinks and blues to pills and booze, which is what killed her in the end. Frank on the record player, well, that's a reference to Frank Sinatra and how she was found dead. It was put on the mink, get in the studio car, somebody big was watching her. Okay, so there could be a reference to her being in the films, in the movies as it were, somebody big had plans for her, but at the same time it could also be a reference to the conspiracy theory behind Marilyn Monroe's death. okay, as to why she died. What was it that caused this death? Was it planned, or was it just an accident? White fur, mouth at the mic, under the lights. Okay, happy birthday to you, happy birthday, Mr. President. The audience drooled this time, so the repetition here, but the audience that are whooping, now they're drooling. And this is reference to when she sang Happy Birthday to the President. They filmed on, deep dumped what they couldn't use from on the cutting room floor. Filmed more, quiet please, action cut, quiet please, action cut, quiet please, action cut, till she couldn't die when she died. It's an interesting repetition there of the filmmaking process, as if this is her on screen, being filmed, being pushed around, manipulated, told what to do continually, repetitively, and then it's till she couldn't die when she died. So it's as if they held back from releasing details of her death, couldn't get older, ill, wasn't allowed to do these things, couldn't stop saying the lines or singing the tunes. The smoking cop who watched as they zipped her into the body bag noticed her strong resemblance to herself, the dark roots of her pubic hair. Very sad detail there at the end, from all this beauty, from all this power, to win over millions of the world's men, as it were, that she's left being shipped away, watched by a policeman who's able to peer at her pubic hair. It's very sad, as to what this great beauty is brought down to right at the end. She had absolutely no power, and that last stanza points out how the media was pushing her around, through the repetitive mentioning of quiet please, action cut, quiet, because it's just basically telling her what to do at every stage. Now, with this final one, we know this is Princess Diana. And it starts with dead. She's elegant bone in mud, ankles crossed, knees clamped, hands clasped, empty head. You know her name. So straight away, this reference to you know her name is talking about someone that we would know because it's relatively recently. Well, 1997 to be exact, but it's recent enough for me. And this list of positions, bone, mud, ankles crossed, knees clamped, is I presume a reference to how she's found in the crashed car, because famously this is what happened. Hounded by the press, driven in an underpass in streets in Paris, and a crash occurred in the tunnel. No one knows how or why, but lots and lots of conspiracy theories and rumours, similar, you might say, to Marilyn Monroe's, that someone might have had her killed, or it was just an accident. Either way, it's a tragedy, and we have ourselves, once again, a death of a people's princess. Okay, so we see plain women turned in the streets where her shadow fell under her spell, swore that what she wore they'd wear, coloured their hair. Well, this is similar to what we were hearing about with Marilyn Monroe. The colouring of hair, the changing of appearance, trying to emulate this person. The whole town came to wave at her on her balcony, to stare and stare and stare. Her face was surely a star. Mythological, once again, but we know this person really existed, just as much as we know that that Marilyn Monroe existed. We know, many of us know of this time when she was around. So, and yet, look how she has achieved this mythological status. Look at the repetition of stare. It's not far away. There's only a small, it's one letter before stare becomes a star. Beauty is fate. They gaped at her bones, danced in a golden dress in the arms of a wooden prince. And the reference to wooden prince is, we presume, a reference to Prince Charles, who was having an affair with someone else. So this is a rather sad, lonely princess, because as it says here, as she posed alone in front of the Taj Mahal, betrayed, beautifully pale. Well, the betrayal, we presume, is a reference to Prince Charles and Camilla Parker Bowles having an affair while she was posing alone. Now, the Taj Mahal, if you didn't know already, it was a palace built was out of love. It was someone's as a testament to their love of a woman, and she's posing alone in front of it, which is a sad irony. The camera's gibbered away. So once again, the media is gibbering away. There's a reference to the sound of their shutters, similarly to how they did with Marilyn Monroe. Now, look at these last two stanzas. This is once again like the reference to fuck in Cleopatra section. Act like a fucking princess. That's the words of the press, the media, telling her to behave, how they loved her, the men from the press. Give us a smile, cunt. Right? Use of that word there is very angry and bitter from the poet, I would say, or the narrator, but it's, in this case, referring to what the press would have said to her. That although they are calling her princess and it says how they loved her, well, it's very ironic because that unless she does what they want, she is just their pawn to move around, and it shows the bitterness towards the press, and maybe the bitterness of the press towards her. And her blue eyes widened to take it all in, the flashbulbs, the half-mast flags, the acres of flowers, history's stinking breath in her face. It's as if she's looking at her own death. And she looks at the half-mast flags. That's a reference to when royalty dies, or someone famous dies. The acres of flowers, history's stinking breath in her face. It's not a nice end, and not a nice way for someone so famous to be treated. And although Cleopatra and Helen of Troy may have commanded whole armies, Marilyn Monroe certainly would have commanded, you might say, whole, masses of young men, or certainly the love of entire nations. And Princess Di, in a way, did as well. But they all suffered for their beauty. And Cleopatra and Helen at least had, you might say, armies behind them. Princess Diana and Marilyn Monroe had nothing like that at all. They were used and destroyed by the media. And I think that's the point about beauty in this poem, that all of them were iconic for their beauty, but all of them ultimately suffered and were killed by this beauty.